Here in the boatyard, we're still working to get all the bronze floors finished up. We set aside one day to do all of the tack welding inside the boat in one shot. And a few of the floors still needed their vertical and base plates before we could get to that. So while we prepared those pieces, we also fabricated the small tabs that will be welded to the wings of the floor timbers and support the sole beams. These sole beams needed to be made as well so that we could clamp them in the boat and use them to line up the small tabs that are going to hold them.
So the last few days we've been working on the stern here. We made these black Locust engine beds, and then those let us design the bronze floors that are going to help support them. Once we had all that figured out, we jumped forward and machined up all of the sole beams. So these are going to attach to the wings, and then the floor inside of the boat that you walk around on will be attached to those. We're going to attach these beams to the wings with these little bronze brackets. So these are just going to get welded on to the wings, and then they'll get through bolted through these beams. So right now we're going to start in the stern and work towards the stem and get all of these floors and all of these tabs tacked and ready for their final weld. Some big welders out there. So this is kind of a slow, fiddly process, and I'm going to be in all sorts of contorted positions trying to get these things tacked inside the boat. But hopefully by the end of the day we'll have them all lined up on the workbench, all tacked together, and then either this afternoon or tomorrow hopefully we can dive into doing their final welds.
I can hold it for you if you want to.
Okay, I got it.
We used clamps to hold all the small pieces in place while tack welding them, but in some areas and for many of the small pieces, including the tabs for the sole beams, it was much easier to hold them by hand. Seeing as they are so funky, each of these stern floor timbers had its own unique process that we had to stop and figure out as we moved along. With this floor, as the space between the two frames is so narrow, we just ran the wings all the way down to the keel timber, and two pieces will be welded fore and aft to act as base plates. The forward part kept slipping out and was tough to get to due to the mold that was in the way, so we had to come up with a creative way to hold it in place.
So I'm going to figure out my angle of attack before I even try to get in there.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I can get her from here.
Cool.
Yeah? Definitely can get her from here. Should let me get in and tack those. So we'll do those, we'll do the verticals. corners and these two corners really well, and then we can kind of play with this a little bit, trying to move it up or down and seeing what we got to do.
As we moved forward and got to the really tall floors, we noticed that the vertical plates did not quite follow the edge of the wings, and had to work that in place somehow. Tack a little up the base, try to move it, tack a little bit more, try to move it. I think that's going to give us the best result, but I don't know how easy that's going to be.
See if I can tweak this over a little bit.
We ended up tacking low, and then using a C-clamp up high for leverage to get the piece to sit where it should.
Where is it?
Yeah, if we pull down, if someone pulls down on that, I should be able to tack this. Yep. I got it.
We could try and put a clamp on this.
Yeah, let me put a tack up here.
Yeah.
And we'll just put one tack, and then we'll put a clamp on that and see if we can tweak it out. Okay, let's just walk through all of these frame by frame, just make sure everything's there, and then I think we can pull all the engine beds and pull these out. Open the windows.
So it looks like we successfully fit the stern floors. With all the intricate pieces to fit in place, they took quite a while, but they came out great. And whatever engine we choose to go with will have a very solid place to reside once it gets here. Now we just needed to be extra careful getting them out of the boat so that we didn't break or bend any of the tack wells on their way to the garage to be fully welded.
I'll bring it to the front right away. Here?
Yeah, this one's going to be particularly fragile at the bottom. With those out of the way, we moved forward to the midship floors. The tabs on these still needed to be fit, so we made some quick marks and then shipped them over to Eric waiting outside with the grinder. They were then brought in as they were ready, and Steve made progress moving forward. As we worked, we were careful to cover the timbers around us to avoid any scorching, which would take more time to clean up later.
Cool. All set with those, huh?
Yeah, I think we can unclamp them, pop them out, move things forward and get some lunch, or get some lunch, then move things forward.
Yeah, I could do with some lunch.
I could use some lunch. It's not cold in here.
No, it's not cold in here. Good thing we got those new windows.
Yeah, it made a big difference. That's it?
Unless you want to do the flat plate at the top for the Samson post.
I think it'll be easier to do on the bench.
Yeah.
Oh.
You're gonna be tired tonight.
Yesterday we had a long day of awkward positions, tack welding, all of these puppies inside the boat, and a little bit of fear from setting the boathouse on fire. But here we are about 24 hours later, and the boathouse is not burnt down. That is good. We put down some wet cloth yesterday and soaked the floor, so we should be safe. And the mission today is to get all of these welded and then ground, because what's the saying there? Grinding and paint make me the welder I ain't. So get them cleaned up, and then the final stage for all of these is going to get a blast in the sandblasting cabinet that we just picked up. And the reason we're going to blast them is not so much that they look pretty, but more so for down the road when some sorry sucker, aka this guy or Alex, has to go down and clean out the bilge, and we have a rag down there and we're wiping down all the bronze. All the little burrs and imperfections are going to grab that rag and they're going to rip it, and it's going to be kind of a pain. So if we spend a little time now and just hit them with the sandblaster and just smooth everything out, they should be nice and smooth. It should break less wine bottles in the bilge, and we make it a lot easier to keep them clean down the road. So today's just going to be welding, grinding, and hopefully a little later sandblasting. That's what we're looking for.
Sizzling bacon.
Yeah, when it's spattering, it's not a good. When it's like that, like I just had, oh man, that's perfect. Well, I failed at welding up the bronze floors, at least on the first go. We had Jacob, who's here from Germany, he's in the States for the summer. He's been stopping by once in a while and helping us out, and he's got a lot of welding experience. And we played with the welder and got the amps and the feed rate set up for the bronze, but when we did that, we did it on some small scrap pieces. And when I went to weld these big ones, what ended up happening is they were way too much of a heat sink, and they sucked too much of the energy out. And we ended up more or less soldering them together as opposed to really having that good penetration and welding them. So Jacob's recommendation was to go back and grind out the welds that I had welded and re-weld them, which is a little bit of a kick in the teeth, but it is way better to have that figured out now when we only had welded up a few of the floors and they're not bolted down into a boat and not breaking in a seaway. With that said, this is one of our bronze floors, and its wooden equivalent would be this. So even if they were just soldered together, they probably would be strong enough for what they need to do, because really they just need to be as strong as this chunk of wood. But we have the capability of welding them, and that's what we bought the big welder for. So it's about 2 days or so worth of work to redo, which in the grand scheme of things is not really that big of a deal. And when you're doing stuff first time and learning on the fly like we are, this kind of thing is bound to happen. As one of those old climbers, John Standard, once said, the new things are done simply by trying them again and again until one succeeds. And to try it again and again means you inevitably failed. And like Mary Pickford once said, this thing we call failure is not the falling down, but the staying down. So with welding the first rounds of bronze floors, I fell flat on my face, busted out the grinder, ground them out, and we've been re-welding them, and they're coming out much, much better. And we learn a lot more from our failures than our successes. So had they come out perfectly, I wouldn't have learned nearly as much about welding and welding bronze as I did by kind of messing up that first batch. But thankfully, it's a fixable thing, and we're just about done fixing them. We just wanted to show you this one that we were going to grind and weld before we finish it up. We saved the craziest floors for last for both building and welding, and this is probably the craziest one of them all. And this is to support the engine beds. So we made some black Locust engine beds that'll sit right in here, and they'll get bolted in horizontally, bolted in vertically, and then the engine will sit on top of those. So we needed to make sure that these were very strong to be able to support that engine and all that extra weight, as well as also being open as much as we could, because the engine actually sits down between the engine beds a little bit, and we want to be able to make sure that there's access underneath and around the engine. So this is what we came up with. They were quite a bit of work to make and fab, but I think they'll totally be worth it in the long run. As you can see, we V-grooved the most critical parts of the weld, so we'll go through and fill those in first, and then we'll run through and do all of the butts. But anything that's really critical and really structural has these V-grooves on it. Put some welding tunes on. Down to my last tip.
Uh-oh.
Stay tuned as we finish fabricating these and get to installing them in the coming videos. Clicking the subscribe button below will make sure that you're notified every time we put out a video. And as always, glad to have you aboard and thank you for following.